Hello everybody, my name is Caitlin and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things horror, and today I'm going to be giving my review of the latest horror streaming offering, Sick. This just dropped on Peacock yesterday. I was able to watch it last night. It is a very cold January day where I am, so I apologize if you can hear the wind whipping outside. I'm really excited to talk about this movie. This is the first new horror film of 2023 that I've seen. I haven't had the chance to go see Megan yet, unfortunately, although what I'm hearing from people is that it's not really a horror film, so I don't know, I'll try to get to that when I can. But this film, Sick, actually took me by surprise. I was not expecting going into the film to enjoy it as much as I did. This film is co-written by Caitlin Crabb, I believe her name is, and Kevin Williamson, and of course the name Kevin Williamson is very familiar to us horror fans. We of course know him as the writer of the original Scream film. He also brought us films like I Know What You Did Last Summer and The Faculty and other 90s goodness such as Dawson's Creek. And I will say, had Kevin Williamson's name not been attached to this project, I don't know if I would have sought out the film. If you've seen advertisings for the film, you know that it's being marketed as kind of this pandemic horror film. And yes, the narrative does take place during the very early days of the 2020 pandemic. So when I was seeing articles about this film and I just saw pandemic horror movie, I was just kind of like, ugh, like that's not really what I'm interested in seeing right now. I feel like there have been a few films in both the horror genre and other genres that have come out that have tried to talk about the pandemic, and most of them are not very good. There was that one movie, Host, that did come out in 2020. I know a lot of people liked that film. I was not as crazy about it as other people were. I definitely admire it for its technical achievement, but I thought the story was kind of lacking. I didn't find it that scary. I found Sick to be a much scarier film than Host. So yeah, I was not looking forward to watching a film about the pandemic. I also didn't really know what the premise of the film was. In my mind going into it, I thought it might be something like Cabin Fever, right? Where you have a bunch of characters that go to a cabin or a lake house and they all start getting infected with some sort of disease. And I personally am not a fan of those kind of movies, so I was nervous going into Sick that that's what it was going to be. But I'm happy to say that that is not what the film is about. It is not about disease. And while the pandemic does play its role throughout the narrative, the film is not focused on that all the time. It really is your classic slasher film. It's very much in the vein of films where you have characters that are out in the middle of nowhere and they're being stalked by someone. The film follows these two girlfriends who are quarantining together. One of the characters, her family owns this beautiful lake house mansion that the two girls go to. And while they're at the lake house, they are being stalked by this killer. There's definitely elements of mystery in this film because you're wondering the whole time, like, who is this person? Why are they stalking these girls? Why do they want to kill them? So it definitely has the elements of a slasher film. I'm a bit hesitant to call it a straight up slasher film because the body count is not that high. When the kills do happen, they are pretty brutal and gory, but this is a film that's much more interested in kind of building an atmosphere and creating a lot of tension. And the film creates tension really well. I was surprised that there were several moments throughout this film where I genuinely felt creeped out. I have been watching horror movies for a very long time now, and it takes a lot for a film to scare me. I just don't get creeped out like I used to. So kudos to this film and the filmmakers. There were definitely scenes where I felt the tension, right? I felt creeped out. There were moments that like I could feel the film just kind of getting under my skin. And that's awesome. I love that. Again, I don't get to experience that much anymore with horror films, so it's always a treat when it happens. There were moments throughout this film that reminded me of something like The Strangers. And I will say, just as a disclaimer after saying that, I don't think this film is quite on par with something like The Strangers, but it reminded me of that film in the sense that you have certain scenes where characters are walking around in the house, right? They're just doing their everyday thing, and then in the background you can see the killer just silently stalking around the house. Or you'll have scenes where there's characters and they're talking in a room to each other, and the camera is framed in such a way that you can see the killer just silently standing in the doorway of the room that the characters are talking in and just listening to them and staring at them. And of course the characters are oblivious that any of this is happening. But when the killers show up in these scenes, like, there's no music or any sort of sound zinger to announce their presence, right? They just kind of silently walk into the frame and they're just there. And I just find that so creepy in horror films, and it's definitely playing on that kind of classic Hitchcockian storytelling trope where you as the audience know that something bad is happening and the characters are oblivious to it. And so you're just sitting there like waiting in anticipation for like, when is bad stuff gonna happen? When are the characters gonna notice that there's a killer standing in their doorway? And I think it's definitely tapping into that fear that a lot of us have of just like being home alone, feeling vulnerable, right? That fear that someone could be in the house with us and we don't know it, or watching us and we don't know it. And so that's what I really liked about this film. It's definitely tapping into those kind of primal fears that we all have, which is also just heightened by the fact that the film is taking place during this pandemic. I think another reason why this film creeped me out so much is the way that the killer looks. Like, he's dressed in that kind of classic, like, look that we would associate with like a burglar or something, right? In the all black with like the ski mask, which I've always just had this weird phobia with like burglars and people breaking into the house. If like me, you grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, you might have seen those old commercials for like home security systems. I remember being a kid and seeing those commercials, and they always featured that look of someone breaking into the house with the all black and the ski mask. And those commercials scared the crap out of me as a kid. And so the look of the killer in Sick very much reminded me of that. So it was just kind of also bringing up all of these childhood fears that I used to have as well. I've seen some people talk about like the jump scares in this movie, and I have to say, going into it, I was expecting there to be more jump scares, but then actually watching it, I didn't really notice that many. I think I can maybe think of like 2 or 3 off the top of my head. I remember there was like one scene where we were following one of the protagonists through this giant lake house mansion. Again, the film has already set up that the killer is inside the house and just kind of walking around. And so we're following the protagonist through the house, and there's no music, there's no sound design. It's just that eerie feeling that you know someone's in the house, and you're just kind of waiting to see, is he gonna jump out and grab her? Is he gonna kill her? Like, what's gonna happen here? And then the scene cuts from that to the other character in the bathroom, like turning on the sink. And just the sound of the sink turning on made me jump. Like, I definitely think that was crafted in a way to be a jump scare. But again, it only really works because the previous scene did such a great job of building up the tension, right? You were on the edge of your seat waiting for something to happen. I also wanted to point out the director, John Hyams, I think is how you say his name. I was reading a little bit about him, and apparently he has done work in horror before. He's also done a lot of work in the action genre. And you can tell that he's an action director. There's a lot of scenes throughout this film where you'll have like a chase sequence, right, where the killer is going after one of the protagonists, right? The scenes are very chaotic. It's a lot of handheld where, you know, you can tell that whoever was operating the camera was running alongside the characters, which I liked. I know we've seen this in like horror films before, but for some reason the way that it was done here just felt really refreshing. It really does make you feel that you as the viewer are also in the scene with these characters. One thing that I really admired about the writing in this film is that it definitely has that Kevin Williamson dark humor aspect. And that dark humor I felt really captured and illustrated both the absurdity and the tragedy of this pandemic. I also feel like this film came out at the right moment. Like, I feel like there's been enough distance from now to when the pandemic first started. Had this film come out in 2020 or 2021, I don't think the dark humor would have worked as well. I think it would have still been too close to what we were actually experiencing. So I really enjoyed Sick. I highly recommend it. I know some people were kind of complaining about like the lack of character development or that the characters weren't really that fleshed out. I personally didn't have that problem. I found the characters very relatable, they felt realistic, and I think the two actresses that play the protagonist did an amazing job. They were both so good. Another thing I have to praise this film for is the runtime. This is a quick movie. It's only an hour and 20 something minutes. Coming off of the holiday season where I went to the theater with family to go see all of the latest Hollywood blockbuster Avatar-like films that are 4+ hours long, it was nice to sit down and just have a straight 80-minute film. I don't understand this trend in Hollywood of films having to be over 2 hours long. Just keep it short and sweet. That's what this film did, and it was effective, and it was one of those films that actually crawled under my skin. Like, I finished watching it and then I got ready for bed and I was in my apartment alone. And I just had that like feeling, you know, when you watch something or read something that gets to you and you just feel a little on edge, you just have a little bit of anxiety. You're very hyper aware of your surroundings, you're very hyper aware of any little sound that you hear. Needless to say, I was very impressed by Sick. Again, it's available on streaming. You can find it on Peacock. So if you're looking for something that has that classic genre feel, definitely check out Sick. I think it has exactly what you're looking for. So those are my thoughts on Sick. This was a great way to kick off the 2023 horror cycle, and hopefully all of the films that are released after this are just as good. Let me know what you thought of the film if you've seen it, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for watching.